They called him a communist lunatic, a radical, a threat to America. But last week, Zohran Mamdani became mayor of New York City. And whether you love it or hate it, democratic socialism just went mainstream in the heart of American capitalism. What you're about to discover isn't just why this happened, but why it was philosophically inevitable. Look, I know what you're thinking. Another political video, another person telling you what to think. But that's not what we do here. Today, we're diving deep into the philosophical and psychological forces that created this moment, from Marx to Mannheim, from Hayek's warnings to Bernie's revolution. You'll understand why millions of Americans, especially young ones, are rejecting the system that built modern America. This isn't about left versus right anymore. It's about understanding the tectonic shifts reshaping our society. And trust me, by the end of this video, you'll see American politics in a completely different light. If you find value in this kind of deep, honest analysis, not propaganda, but real philosophical exploration, hit that like button and subscribe. It genuinely helps us reach more independent thinkers like you. Let's begin with an uncomfortable truth that nobody wants to discuss.
The philosophical awakening from Marx to Manhattan.
Picture this. A 34-year-old socialist just became mayor of America's financial capital, and half the country is losing their minds while the other half celebrating like it's 1917. But here's what nobody's telling you. This isn't some random political earthquake. What we're witnessing is the inevitable collision between 19th century philosophy and 21st century reality. Karl Marx once wrote that capitalism contains the seeds of its own destruction. And right now, those seeds are sprouting all over Manhattan. When democratic socialism started gaining traction in America, the establishment treated it like a joke, just some college kids who'd eventually grow up and get real jobs. But Marx understood something they didn't. Economic contradictions don't just disappear because you ignore them. They intensify, they fester, they explode. And when Zohran Mamdani won New York City with over 1 million votes, he proved what Antonio Gramsci predicted decades ago. Cultural hegemony can shift suddenly when material conditions become unbearable. Think about it. The very city that houses Wall Street, the beating heart of global capitalism, just elected a card-carrying member of the Democratic Socialists of America. That's like Rome electing a barbarian emperor. The philosophical roots of this movement run deeper than Bernie Sanders or AOC. We're talking about ideas that trace back to the Paris Commune, through Eugene Debs, all the way to today's struggles over rent, healthcare, and basic human dignity. These aren't new concepts. They're timeless human desires dressed in modern political clothing. The fascinating part? Democratic socialism in America isn't following the European playbook. It's creating something entirely new, a uniquely American synthesis of collectivist economics and individualist culture. Mamdani himself quotes Martin Luther King Jr. more than Karl Marx, understanding intuitively what successful revolutionaries always know. You have to speak the language of your audience, not your textbooks. And that's exactly what's terrifying the establishment.
The psychology of economic rage. Why inequality breeds revolution.
Let me tell you something about human psychology that'll explain why democratic socialism is spreading like wildfire among young Americans. Erich Fromm, the brilliant psychoanalyst who fled Nazi Germany, discovered that humans have a fundamental need for both security and freedom. When capitalism fails to provide security, when you can't afford rent despite working 60 hours a week, people don't just get angry. They get revolutionary. And that's exactly what's happening in New York City right now. Here's the psychological bomb that nobody wants to discuss. Inequality doesn't just hurt your wallet. It literally rewires your brain. Wilhelm Reich observed that economic oppression creates what he called character armor, psychological defenses that eventually crack under pressure. When millennials and Gen Z watched their parents lose homes in 2008, something broke in the American psyche. The social contract, work hard, play by the rules, succeed, revealed itself as a lie. And once you see the lie, you can't unsee it. You know what's really driving people toward democratic socialism? It's not ideology, it's exhaustion. Jung talked about the collective, unconscious, shared psychological patterns across humanity. Well, there's a collective exhaustion spreading through America's working class. Imagine running a race where the finish line keeps moving further away. That's modern capitalism for most Americans. Your rent goes up 20%, your wages go up 2%, and some economist on TV tells you the economy's doing great. The cognitive dissonance becomes unbearable. The establishment keeps asking why young people embrace socialism, as if it's some mysterious phenomenon. But from predicted this decades ago, when capitalism makes people feel worthless, they'll seek systems that restore their dignity. Democratic socialism offers something capitalism can't: the radical idea that human value isn't determined by market forces. And once that idea takes hold in enough minds, revolution becomes inevitable.
The Hayek-Friedman nightmare. Conservative fears realized.
Friedrich Hayek is probably spinning in his grave right now. The Austrian economist who wrote The Road to Serfdom warned that any step towards socialism would inevitably lead to totalitarianism. Well, New York City just took that step, and conservatives are acting like the sky is falling. But here's what's interesting. They're using Hayek's arguments from 1944 to fight a battle in 2025, and they're losing because the battlefield has completely changed. Milton Friedman, Hayek's intellectual heir, used to say that economic freedom and political freedom were inseparable. You can't have one without the other. And for decades, this argument worked like magic. Any suggestion of government intervention was met with cries of Venezuela or Soviet Union. But democratic socialists like Mamdani have flipped the script. They're asking, what freedom does a minimum wage worker have when they can't afford insulin? What liberty exists when you're one medical bill away from bankruptcy? The conservative nightmare isn't really about economics, it's about power. When President Trump calls Zohran Mamdani a communist lunatic, he's not making an intellectual argument. He's expressing primal fear. The fear that maybe, just maybe, the hierarchies that benefit the wealthy aren't natural or necessary. Hayek believed that market outcomes, no matter how unequal, were just because they emerged from voluntary exchanges. But try telling that to someone working 3 jobs to pay rent in Manhattan. Here's the delicious irony. Conservatives created the very conditions that made democratic socialism viable. By pushing neoliberalism to its extreme, slashing social services, deregulating everything, treating workers like disposable commodities, they proved that pure market capitalism is brutal. Friedman thought people would always choose economic efficiency over economic justice. He was wrong. When efficiency means Jeff Bezos has 200 billion while Amazon workers pee in bottles, people start questioning the whole system.
The American paradox. When capitalism betrays its promise.
Alexis de Tocqueville visited America in the 1830s and marveled at something unique. Americans genuinely believed anyone could make it. This wasn't just propaganda. It was lived reality for many. But here's the brutal truth about modern America. We've become everything Tocqueville said we weren't. We're now less economically mobile than the European aristocracies our founders fled. The American dream hasn't just died. It's been murdered, and everyone knows who pulled the trigger. Consider this mind-blowing statistic. A child born poor in Denmark has a better chance of becoming middle class than one born in America. Let that sink in. The land of opportunity now offers fewer opportunities than socialist Scandinavia. When democratic socialism gained traction in New York City, it wasn't because people read Marx, it was because they lived capitalism. They experienced the paradox firsthand, working harder than their parents, but achieving less, following all the rules, but still losing the game. The establishment keeps insisting that capitalism is the best system we've got, but best for whom? When Zohran Mamdani talks about rent freezes and free public transit, he's not proposing radical ideas. He's suggesting what most developed nations already have. The American paradox is that we've confused corporate freedom with personal freedom. We've created a system where companies have unlimited rights while actual humans have unlimited responsibilities. That's not capitalism. It's corporate feudalism with better marketing. You want to know why democratic socialism is winning? Because Americans are tired of being gaslit. They're told the economy is booming while they can't afford groceries. They're told unemployment is low while working 3-gig jobs without benefits. They're told to be grateful for opportunities while drowning in student debt. Tocqueville wrote about American optimism, but optimism without hope becomes delusion. And Americans are done being delusional about their economic system.
The generational uprising. Why youth choose socialism.
Karl Mannheim's theory of generations explains exactly why millennials and Gen Z are embracing democratic socialism with religious fervor. Every generation, Mannheim argued, is shaped by the historical events of their youth. Well, what shaped young Americans? They watched their parents lose homes in 2008. They graduated into the worst job market since the Depression. They've lived their entire adult lives in economic crisis. Is it any wonder they reject the system that failed them? Here's what older generations don't understand. For young Americans, capitalism isn't a successful system with some problems. It's a failed system with some successes. They've never experienced the capitalism of the 1950s with strong unions and affordable housing. They know the gig economy capitalism, the student debt capitalism, the you'll own nothing and be happy capitalism. When Bernie Sanders talks about democratic socialism, they don't hear radical rhetoric. They hear common sense. The generational divide over socialism is actually a reality divide. Boomers who bought houses for $30,000 can't comprehend paying $3,000 in monthly rent. Gen X who got jobs with handshakes don't understand sending 500 resumes into the algorithmic void. But millennials and Gen Z, they understand perfectly that the old rules don't apply. The social contract their parents believed in, work hard, get ahead, is as outdated as a fax machine. What's fascinating is how this generational uprising mirrors previous historical moments. The progressive era emerged when young Americans rejected the Gilded Age's inequality. The New Deal happened when youth demanded change after the Depression. Now we're seeing another generational revolution, and democratic socialism is its banner. Strauss and Howe's generational theory predicted this crisis moment, when younger generations would fundamentally restructure society. That restructuring just began in New York City.
The Bernie-AOC effect, building the socialist pipeline.
Before Bernie Sanders ran in 2016, saying socialism in American politics was like saying Voldemort at Hogwarts. People literally feared the word. But Bernie did something brilliant. He moved the Overton window, that range of acceptable political discourse, so far left that ideas once considered radical became mainstream. Free healthcare? Radical in 2015, common sense by 2020. Free college? Crazy talk then, serious policy now. Bernie didn't just run a campaign. He shifted American consciousness. Then came Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, turning democratic socialism from an old man's crusade into a young woman's revolution. AOC understood something Bernie didn't. You don't just need policies, you need personality. She made socialism sexy, accessible, even fun. Her Twitter game? Legendary. Her ability to explain complex economics while making dinner on Instagram? Revolutionary. She proved that democratic socialists could be normal, relatable people, not the scary radicals of conservative nightmares. But here's what really matters. Bernie and AOC created a pipeline. They showed ambitious progressives that you could win elections as a democratic socialist. Zohran Mamdani didn't emerge from nowhere. He emerged from the movement Bernie built, and AOC expanded. The Democratic Socialists of America went from 5,000 members to nearly 100,000. That's not growth, that's explosion. They created infrastructure, training programs, and most importantly, proof that socialists could win in America. The establishment Democrats thought they could contain this movement, pat it on the head, and send it home. Nancy Pelosi famously said socialism wasn't the Democratic Party's future. Well, the future just became New York City's present. The Bernie-AOC effect isn't just about moving discourse left. It's about building alternative power structures. While establishment Democrats chase corporate donors, Democratic Socialists built grassroots armies. Guess which strategy just won the biggest city in America?
The Nordic illusion versus American reality.
Everyone loves to point at Scandinavia when discussing democratic socialism. But here's the truth nobody wants to admit. Nordic countries aren't socialist, and American democratic socialists aren't trying to copy Denmark. This confusion, sometimes deliberate, sometimes genuine, obscures what's really happening. When Zohran Mamdani talks about democratic socialism, he's not importing European models. He's creating something uniquely American that addresses uniquely American problems. John Rawls, the great philosopher of justice, proposed a thought experiment, designed society from behind a veil of ignorance, not knowing if you'll be rich or poor. Would you choose American capitalism or Nordic social democracy? The answer's obvious, but here's the kicker. American democratic socialists aren't even asking for Nordic levels of social support. They're asking for basics: healthcare that doesn't bankrupt you, education that doesn't enslave you, housing that doesn't consume your entire paycheck. That's not radical, that's rational. The Nordic model works because those societies have high trust and ethnic homogeneity. America has neither. We're diverse, divided, and deeply suspicious of each other. That's why American democratic socialism focuses less on welfare states and more on democratizing power. When Mamdani proposes city-owned grocery stores, he's not copying Sweden. He's responding to food deserts in the Bronx. When he demands rent freezes, he's not channeling Copenhagen. He's fighting Manhattan landlords. Context matters, and American problems require American solutions. What drives conservatives crazy is that democratic socialists have stopped playing defense about the Nordic model. They're not saying we want to be Denmark. They're saying we want workers on corporate boards, public ownership of utilities, and economic democracy. These ideas trace back to American traditions, from Thomas Paine's Citizens' Dividend to Lincoln's labor theory of value. Democratic socialism in America isn't foreign import. It's homegrown revolution.
The coming storm: revolution, reform, or backlash.
Antonio Gramsci wrote about two types of political struggle: war of movement, sudden revolution, and war of position, gradual cultural change. What's happening in America right now is both. Mamdani's victory represents a sudden breakthrough, but it's built on years of gradual organizing. The question isn't whether change is coming. It's what form that change will take. Revolution? Reform? Or violent backlash from those with everything to lose? President Trump already threatened to cut federal funding to New York City, calling Mamdani a communist lunatic. Republican governors are joking, but not really, about imposing tariffs on New Yorkers. This isn't normal political opposition. It's existential fear. The capitalist class understands what many progressives don't. Mamdani's victory in New York could trigger a domino effect. If democratic socialism works in America's largest city, why not Chicago? Why not Los Angeles? Why not everywhere? The smart money's on reform rather than revolution. But here's the thing about historical moments. They're unpredictable. Nobody expected the Berlin Wall to fall until it did. Nobody predicted Occupy Wall Street would reshape American politics until it had. Mamdani faces massive structural obstacles: hostile state government, resistant capital, skeptical media. But he also has something powerful: millions of New Yorkers desperate for change. When material conditions align with political opportunity, anything's possible. Here's my prediction, and you can quote me: We're entering an era of American political realignment as significant as the New Deal. The old divisions, Democrat versus Republican, are dissolving into new ones, democratic socialists versus corporate capitalists. Mamdani's victory isn't the end of something, it's the beginning. Whether that beginning leads to progressive transformation or reactionary catastrophe depends on what happens next. But one thing's certain. The comfortable center that defined American politics for decades is dead, and it's not coming back.
The choice before us.
So here we are. A democratic socialist runs America's financial capital. The generation that grew up in economic crisis is reshaping politics. The comfortable center is dead, and everything you thought you knew about American capitalism is up for debate. But this isn't just about Mamdani or New York City. It's about the fundamental question facing our civilization. Can capitalism evolve, or must it be replaced? The philosophers we've explored today, from Marx to Hayek, from to Rawls, they all grapple with this same question. Now it's our turn. Here's what I want you to consider. Are you witnessing the beginning of America's transformation or its decline? Is democratic socialism the cure for capitalism's failures? Or will it create new problems we can't yet imagine? These aren't rhetorical questions. They're the defining challenges of our time. Whatever your position, one thing's undeniable. The status quo is crumbling. The question isn't whether change is coming. It's what role you'll play in shaping it. Will you be a passive observer or an active participant in this historical moment? If this analysis challenged your thinking, even if you disagree with parts of it, subscribe and hit the notification bell. We need more people willing to wrestle with complex ideas, not just consume simple answers. Share this with someone who needs to understand what's really happening in America. The future isn't written yet, but it's being written now. And whether you realize it or not, you're holding the pen.